My name is Marcus Thompson, and when the lawyer read my father's will in front of my entire family, I discovered a truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. For 28 years, I believed Robert Thompson was my biological father, until the moment the lawyer said, "Marcus, you are not Robert's son. Your real father is William Harrison, a billionaire who died last month and left his entire fortune to you." I was sitting in that room, feeling my world collapse around me, when I realized my mother was crying, not from sadness, but from relief that a 3-decade secret had finally been revealed. The expression on my brothers' faces was pure shock when they realized the family failure had just inherited $500 million. If you're watching this, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will shake everything you think about family and truth. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know where my fellow devastating family secret discoverers are. This is my story about how a will reading revealed that my entire life was a lie, and how I reacted when I found out who I really am. Growing up in the Thompson family meant living in the shadow of expectations I could never reach. My father, Robert, was a successful lawyer. My mother, Linda, was a university professor. And my 2 older brothers, David and Michael, perfectly followed the family footsteps. David became a doctor. Michael became an engineer. Then there was me. Since childhood, I felt different. Not just because I struggled academically while my brothers were brilliant, but because there was something in the family dynamic that never made sense. My father treated David and Michael with obvious pride, but with me, there was always a distance I couldn't understand. Marcus just doesn't have the same drive as the other boys. I would hear my mother whisper to my father when they thought I wasn't listening. Maybe he needs more time to find his way. But time never seemed to help. I graduated high school with mediocre grades, went to community college while my brothers went to prestigious universities, and ended up working a series of jobs my family considered temporary, even when I was 28 years old. "When are you going to decide on a real career?" My father would ask during family dinners, his voice loaded with the disappointment I knew so well. I always felt there was something they weren't telling me, but I never imagined it was this. My father's death 3 weeks ago was devastating, but it also brought to the surface family tensions that had been growing for years. During the wake, I noticed how my brothers talked about continuing Dad's legacy. While I felt like an outsider watching from the sidelines, "At least now Marcus won't disappoint Dad anymore," I heard David whisper to Michael during the funeral. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. In the days following the funeral, my family began discussing the inheritance with a naturalness that made me uncomfortable. They assumed everything would be divided equally among the 3 sons. But I noticed my mother became strangely silent whenever the subject came up. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked one night when I found her crying in the kitchen. "I'm just processing everything, honey," she replied, but there was something in her eyes that told me there was more than just grief. I started noticing small things I had never paid attention to before. Family photos where I looked different from my brothers. Comments my parents made about my unique nature. The way my mother sometimes looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked directly during a family dinner. "Don't be paranoid, Marcus." David responded quickly. "You've always had a tendency to dramatize things." But I knew there was something. I could feel it between the lines of every conversation, in the way my mother averted her gaze when I asked certain questions. The week before the will reading was the most tense of my life. My brothers were clearly planning how to divide our father's assets, discussing who would get the house, who would take over the law practice, how the investments would be distributed. I felt completely excluded from these conversations. "Marcus will probably need help managing his share of the inheritance," I heard Michael say on the phone with someone. "You know how he is with money. The humiliation was constant and subtle. They didn't exclude me directly, but they talked about me as if I were a child who needed supervision. As if my share of the inheritance was a burden they would have to manage. Maybe it's better if David and I handle the more complex financial aspects, Michael suggested during a family meeting. Marcus can keep some of the simpler things. I was starting to feel like I didn't belong in that family at all. Not just because I was different, but because they treated me as if I were fundamentally inferior. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. There was a feeling in the air, as if something big was about to happen. My mother had been particularly nervous in recent days, and I caught her several times looking at me with an expression that mixed love and guilt. "Mom, are you sure everything's okay?" I asked once more. "Tomorrow you'll understand everything, Marcus," she said, her words loaded with a weight I couldn't comprehend. I had no idea my entire life was about to change. The morning of the will reading, I dressed in the only suit I owned, one my mother had bought for me years ago for job interviews. My brothers arrived at the lawyer's office in their expensive cars, discussing investment strategies as if they already knew exactly what to expect. I felt like an imposter sitting in that elegant room. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was an older man who had known our father for decades. He greeted us with appropriate solemnity and began with the technical aspects of the will. Robert Thompson leaves his house to his wife Linda. His investments will be divided between David and Michael, and his law practice will be transferred to David. He read methodically. I was expecting to hear my name somewhere, maybe a small amount of money or some personal items. But as the lawyer continued reading, my name didn't appear. My brothers exchanged satisfied glances. It was as if I didn't even exist. Then Mr. Patterson stopped and looked directly at me. "Marcus, there is a separate section of the will that refers specifically to you," he said, his voice changing tone. I felt my heart race. Finally, I thought, my father had left me something. Your father, Robert Thompson, left very specific instructions about a revelation he wanted made after his death. The lawyer opened a sealed envelope and looked at my mother, who had become visibly pale. "Marcus," he said slowly, "Robert Thompson was not your biological father." The world stopped. The lawyer's words echoed in the room like an exploding bomb. I felt like I was falling into a bottomless pit, trying to process what I had just heard. "What do you mean?" I managed to whisper, my voice coming out strangled. Mr. Patterson continued reading. "Your real father is William Harrison, the businessman, who passed away last month. Robert Thompson raised you as his own son at your mother's request, but always knew the truth." I looked at my mother, who was crying silently. David and Michael looked like they had been struck by lightning. "William Harrison?" David stammered. "The billionaire William Harrison?" "The same," confirmed the lawyer. "And there's more. Mr. Harrison left specific instructions in his own will. Marcus, you are the sole heir to his fortune." I couldn't breathe. William Harrison was one of the richest men in the country. I had read about his death in the newspapers, but never imagined I had any connection to him. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely audible. $500 million, the lawyer replied calmly. "In addition to properties, companies, and other assets totaling approximately $1 billion. The silence in the room was deafening. My brothers looked at me as if I were an alien. My mother continued crying, but now I realized they were tears of relief. "Why?" I asked, looking directly at her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because William asked us not to," she said through tears. "He wanted you to have a normal childhood, away from the pressure of being a billionaire's son. But he always knew where you were, always followed your life." I was trying to process decades of lies when the lawyer continued. "There is a personal letter from William Harrison for you, Marcus." With trembling hands, I opened the letter from the man I had just discovered was my real father. His handwriting was elegant, the words carefully chosen. My dear Marcus, if you are reading this, it means the time has finally come for you to know the truth. I am your biological father, and every day of the past 28 years, I wanted to be present in your life. But your mother and I decided it would be better for you to grow up in a stable family, away from the spotlight and pressures that come with my name. I stopped reading for a moment, feeling tears burn my eyes. I followed every milestone of your life. I know about your struggles in school, your jobs, your difficulties finding your place in the world. I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You were always different because you are different. You are my son. The letter continued, explaining how he had structured his fortune so I could use it to find my true purpose in life, free from the expectations that had suffocated me for so long. When I finished reading, I looked at my brothers. David was clearly in shock, mentally, calculating what this meant for his own financial expectations. Michael seemed to be struggling to process that the family failure had just become richer than they had ever dreamed of being. So, you're not really our brother? David asked, his voice loaded with a mixture of confusion and resentment. I'm your half-brother, I corrected, my voice firmer than I expected. But after a lifetime of being treated like I didn't belong in this family, maybe it's time I found out where I really belong. My mother got up and came to me. Marcus, I'm sorry. We thought we were protecting you. Protecting from what? I asked. From knowing who I really am? From having a chance to know my real father? The weight of decades of lies was finally revealing itself, and I was beginning to understand why I had always felt like a stranger in my own family. In the weeks following the revelation, my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. Not just because of the wealth, although that was surreal, but because I finally understood why I had always felt different. I hired my own lawyers to manage the inheritance and began learning about the businesses my real father had built. I discovered he had donated billions to charity throughout his life and had left specific instructions for me to continue that legacy. The dynamic with my family changed completely. David and Michael, who had always treated me as inferior, now approached me with a mixture of forced respect and obvious resentment. They wanted to maintain relationships, but I could see it was mainly motivated by financial interest. You're still our brother, Michael said during a tense family dinner. This doesn't change anything. Actually, it changes everything, I replied calmly. Now I understand why you always treated me like I didn't belong here. Because I really didn't belong. My mother and I had long conversations about the choices she made. I understood her motivations, but the fact remained. They denied me the chance to know my real father, and that was something I would have to learn to forgive. The biggest change was in how I saw myself. For 28 years, I felt like a failure because I couldn't meet the Thompson family's expectations. Now I realized those expectations were never really mine to meet. I started using my inheritance for causes I believe in, continuing my father's philanthropic work. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a real purpose. Looking back, I realize that sometimes the biggest revelations come at the most unexpected moments. I spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong, only to discover I belonged. To a completely different world. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own family, know that sometimes it happens because you're destined for something greater. Sometimes, not fitting in is the first sign that you were made for something extraordinary. Leave in the comments if you've ever discovered family secrets that changed your perspective on who you are. And if this story touched you in any way, leave a like and subscribe for more stories about discovering your true identity. Remember, sometimes the truth hurts, but it also sets you free. And sometimes discovering who you really are is worth more than any financial inheritance.